that, my friends, is why if you continue to give Peter Cheez-Its, eventually he'll summon poop monsters from the sewers to take over the world. This needs to be dealt with immediately, or else the entire planet will be covered in crap. I mean, it kind of already is, but you get the idea.
Like that's ever gonna happen. What a load of...
Nowadays, pure intrigue can completely sell me on a game. I've grown to love stories of games as well as the adventures you go on. In fact, thinking about a game's story, especially the final boss fight and finale in general, gets me super excited and sometimes motivates me to finish a game. I've completed plenty of games that I would never normally finish to see the whole story of it, and also see what the final boss looks like. Which is why I hate it whenever those stupid spoiler thumbnails appear on my YouTube recommended page. Yeah, thank you, very epic! Of course, the game being fun is still very important, so it's a good thing that this kind of interest leads me to playing some great games, not just on a story level, but also a gameplay level. And today, we're going to talk about something way scarier than video game spoilers. Oh no, that's a long one. I'll get to that another time. Now, I think this interest started with the Bulb Boy. I randomly saw this game when scrolling around on the Nintendo eShop one day, and I don't think I've ever bought a game purely on what a digital store page has shown me. It looked to be a game with a very creepy and nightmarish theme, with horrific creatures and stuff, but it wasn't a typical horror game. No, it was a point-and-click adventure! Yeah, if you're a long-time viewer of mine, because a few months makes you a long-time viewer, then you already know my experience with this genre, and after this you might start getting sick of me talking about them. But I actually played this before Grim Fandango, and even the Sam & Max games. Yeah, this was my first point-and-click in several years. I got the Steam version of it, and let's just say that I had a pretty weird experience. It was very much out of my comfort zone. So unfortunately, I tried to capture footage of my second playthrough, but the recording ended up being really bad and very glitchy. I don't think this playthrough was a complete waste of time since it was a nice refresher, but I still wish I could have used my own footage this time around. Speaking of technical issues, when I first played this game, I had the weirdest technical error I've ever experienced. When the game boots, there's a brightness setting, and for some reason, it went hardcore Australia on me, and it was upside down. The way I fixed this was by setting the graphics setting to max before starting the game. Though I must say that the brightness is the most fun I've ever had configuring anything in a video game. The game begins on a very ominous night at a house that Bulb Boy, his grandpa, and their pet dog live. It's pretty late, there's nothing good on TV, Bulb Boy should go to bed, and grandpa hasn't taken his medication.
I got my
Okay, Gramps, I think someone should cut down on their oil intake. From here, the game presents us with its gameplay. While it is a point-and-click game, unlike the previous two I've covered, it's a lot more linear. You're restricted to one room at a time, and your objective is to look around, gather objects in much more unique ways than your average game of this genre, and use things in your environment to proceed on to the next room. This is evident in this first room, where we can examine certain objects such as the TV up close. I love this so much, mainly because of the visuals. Without getting ahead of myself, there are plenty of ways to interact in these sections, and the best part is when you've completed everything in one, then the game will automatically boot you out of it so you'll know when you're completely done with it. Speaking of getting stuff done, now that we're finished with all the stuff here, we're about ready to have a completely normal, perfectly average night. Right, Pupper?
Boys.
Right. Okay then. That's certainly not... Shut up! That's certainly not good. This is where the game starts presenting us with the room-based structure. Don't worry, we'll get back to talking about that later. I'm pretty sure all of you are very concerned about Grandpa right now. Yeah, he's not good. Alright, I get that this is a serious situation, but I don't understand what the point of a lamp is if it can't handle some darkness. It's like if bug repellent just gave the bug a weapon of mass destruction. This might help. Aha! That's right, my grandpa isn't just gonna get bopped by some scary black hentai. Well, now we don't have much of a choice other than following that thing and seeing what happened. By the way, as you've probably noticed by now, there isn't any dialogue in the game at all. Everyone speaks in the ancient language of gibberish, or, as I like to call it, online political discourse. And now I feel like we can delve deeper into the gameplay. So like I've said earlier, this game is room-to-room based rather than having a large amount of areas accessible at once. This may seem unsatisfying to some looking for a traditional point-and-click game, as well as some other parts of the gameplay I'll bring up later, but personally, I enjoy this quite a bit. Each room is a series of condensed puzzles that I still find very fun to solve, and due to how linear the game is, you won't find yourself getting lost and stuck. Sure, it's basic, but it feels nice to have something simpler that can still make you think, instead of a game that makes you keep track of several different areas and objects and how you can interact with them. Especially when in certain cases, those puzzles can be a little bit ridiculous. I love having unpopular opinion. They can be too open, and you can find yourself not knowing what to do next, which just leaves you flustered and bored walking around and trying random things hoping to proceed at some point. Bolt Boy's puzzles are pretty easy and beginner friendly, but even an easy puzzle can still be fun as long as you have to put thought into it. And even with all that, if you're somehow still too stupid to solve a puzzle, then there's a hint system that will show you an item you need to use. Personally, I only needed to use it once, and it was because of this stick. I didn't know that it was an interactable object. I also quite like the unique approach to some of these puzzles too. Early on in the game, this spider demands that you get it some bugs. For one of them, you have to interact with this cut wire at just the right time to zap the bug out of the air. And speaking of unique puzzles, let's talk about something that might seem very out of place in a game like this. Boss fights. Now, boss fights in point-and-click games can be very hit and miss. Normally though, they're just a puzzle or two that's placed in a scenario that a regular fight would take place in. I consider them good just so long as they can deliver a good puzzle, but also make you feel like you're taking down a boss as well. The Sam & Max Telltale series did this quite a bit with some moderate success. The best example probably being the duel against Skunk Ape at the end of episode 3 of The Devil's Playhouse, and the climax of episode 4 is a pretty good one too. They're tough to pull off, well, since this genre isn't action-oriented, so most games like this don't even bother trying. I'm not trying to paint that as a bad thing. There are plenty of reasons to not have boss fights in point-and-click games. As for Bolt Boy, well, due to how different this game approaches the gameplay in comparison to others of its kind, I think that this has the best bosses in any point-and-click game. And while there isn't much competition, trust me, that's still a compliment. The frickin' chicken. Man, this thing was pretty dang scary when I first played the game. It walks around the kitchen coughing up its esophagus, unless that is its esophagus, but that doesn't matter. And while it's having fun doing that, you have to gather objects to bake a pot pie, including maggots. In other words, you're a Panda Express employee. You also have to hide from it by jumping in garbage cans or getting inside the fridge. This is pretty tense, and the chicken can actually kill you, but this game is very generous with checkpoints, so there isn't much consequence to getting killed other than sometimes very upsetting death animations. Do you like flying pupper, pal? Yosh, he's so cool and little brittle. Okie doke. The addition of death may seem tacked on, but it contributes to the bosses actually feeling like bosses, and also in areas like the sewer, they're able to make avoiding enemies into a puzzle itself. That's all I have to say about the bosses. They were handled the best way I've ever seen and managed to be very entertaining as well as still fit in with the rest of the game. Something else that you've certainly noticed from the footage is how Bullet Boy travels around. During certain sections you'll start moving in different ways, such as when you lose your body and you're just ahead. This, of course, limits your movement in the sewers, so you have to find something else to expand your capabilities of exploration. Eventually, you find this fish body, and now you can properly swim throughout the sewers and proceed forward, while also offering up a somewhat new control scheme. Now, this doesn't add too much to the game, but I feel like it's worth mentioning because it makes every section of the game more distinct than it already is. Something else that makes each part feel so unique and memorable is the atmosphere. This isn't necessarily a horror game in the sense that it's scary, however it still delivers on building a really disturbing setting. I can't begin to tell you how uneasy I was whenever I was first playing the game. And then of course there are parts like the headless chicken encounter that make you really tense, and it doesn't help that right afterwards you're put into a boss fight against quite possibly the scariest thing I've ever seen in a video game. And to add to the atmosphere, there's the sound design. Yeah, the music is pretty good, but I'm talking about all the little noises. There are plenty of sections in this game that are silent, so the sounds really get their time to sink in. And the cherry on top of all that are the Easter eggs, as well as other subtle things that you may or may not notice. Pretty sure you all know what that's a reference to. Actually, since I've been talking so much about the atmosphere, there's one more major part of the game that I need to point out. A few moments of the game are flashbacks that usually come up right before a boss fight. Unfortunately, I find some of these parts to be rather annoying, since I prefer the creepier sections, as well as these having very tedious gameplay, such as getting these bugs to fly over to this frog. It's not a fun puzzle at all, it's really boring honestly. Well, at least the pupper pees. You know, he actually pees for longer if you have him drink more water. Well, after witnessing that, there's only one thing I can think of to say. That was way funnier than anything Jimmy Kimmel has done in his entire career. At the very least, you get to play as Grandpa. That's pretty epic, honestly. And it even has the most intense QuickTime event I've ever seen. These flashbacks are surprisingly very sweet in comparison to the rest of the game. An object is shown at the end of each of these flashbacks. These things at one point brought these three happy memories, and surely you've noticed the correlation by now. The darkness has corrupted these pleasant memories into monsters, and I wouldn't expect anything less from this creature. It is part hentai after all, I mean that's just as evil. And even after figuring out all of this, none of it explains the scary poop monster in the toilet. You can't have happy memories of crap. Oh, I beg of you, for the love of everything good, do not try and prove me wrong on that. And thus, I think it's time to talk about the final boss, which is really something great. And what the darkness would corrupt this time is something a lot more near and dear than just a cherished memory. I love this final boss. It fits in so well with the rest of the game. It mixes in avoiding death with exploration once you start going inside the monster. You have to solve puzzles to shut off every system of its body. It has such a great mix of puzzles and is quite possibly the most unique final boss I've ever fought. And every other area of the game has a green glow, except for the inside of the monster, which is this ominous red. And there's a nice contrast in the music. While you're on the outside, you hear this really fast-paced track. And on the inside, on the other hand, you hear a really slow and somber one. the Heart of Darkness and lick it to death, everything is back to how it should be. This whole game left a pretty good impression on me the first time I played it, but wow, I really didn't expect my opinion on it to rise any higher. Point and click games don't have much, if any, replay value, yet it felt great to come back to this one and appreciate certain aspects of it more. The only major turnoff I can see is, well, in both of my playthroughs I ended up beating it in 2 sittings. And the game costs around $7. It's pretty short, but I'm still really happy that I played it, and I guess that's why interest still influences me to get games to this day. You never know when you'll find a hidden gem that you'll unexpectedly enjoy. I'm Luggo the Luggician, and I encourage you to step out of your comfort zone and find some really interesting games. Even if that means getting very, very uncomfortable.
I want retired, I